My name is Helen Zhang, and I am the professional developer at the Lemelson-MIT Program. Thank you very much for your interest in the webinar this evening. Welcome you all. As a lot of you are aware of, we are offering a series of free webinars once every 2 weeks featuring topics essential to invention education. The webinar will be recorded and posted online. After this webinar, we will send out a separate email about how to access the recording and the next webinar. Specifically for our next webinar, we will talk about how to narrow down and prototype invention problems. So please keep an eye on that. So for today's webinar, we have set up a chat window for you to post your questions. At the end of the presentation, we'll have about 5 minutes to answer the questions. You don't need to turn on the microphone on your computer. Okay, let's get started. So for the webinar this evening, we're going to talk about project-based learning frameworks, and also we invited experienced teachers to share their experience of implementing project-based learning projects in classrooms or in informal settings. Okay, so first let's get started. I want to briefly introduce our program. So the Lemelson-MIT Program is a multifaceted program for inventors at all ages. We have over 15 years of experience working with high school and middle school teachers and students on invention education. We specifically offer JV Inventive and Inventive Grants Initiative. So we have been working with over 200 high school teams, and the inventions students created have been awarded 7 U.S. patents. Okay, so this evening we'll talk about how we envision the relationship between project-based learning and invention, and we will offer practical suggestions and tips when implementing project-based learning in classrooms and also in other settings. So I'm very happy that this evening I invited Don, Scott, and also Mike to co-host this webinar with me. So first, a brief introduction of Don and Scott. So Don and Scott come from the Canadian Valley Tech Center in Oklahoma. Don and Scott both have been very experienced in implementing project-based learning, particularly around the career technology areas. So Don, can you tell us more about the Canadian Valley Tech Center and your experience?
Sure. Our tech center is located in actually 3 places. We have 3 campuses. We have one in El Reno, Oklahoma. We have one in Chickasha, Oklahoma, and we have one in Yukon, Oklahoma. And these 3 campuses serve a variety of programs in the career technical realm. We have all kinds of programs from the traditional trade all the way through pre-engineering for high school students and advanced mathematics. So we serve a variety of people. And then we also we have done professional development with our sending schools that share students with us. And that's what the ULearn Academy partnership started out as. And that's where our maker movement really kind of got started. But we also, we like to think of ourselves as an organization that serves students all the way from our early care program, where we have a working daycare, so infants, all the way through adult and continuing education classes, where we have people well into their 90s taking those kinds of courses. So we're the full spectrum of life.
Yeah, that's very nice. Yeah, so also, thank you very much, Don, for the introduction. So this evening, I also very lucky to have one of our master teachers at the Lemelson-MIT Program, Mike Gallagher, to share his experience. Specifically, Mike leads the Technology Education Department at the Saratoga Springs High School in New York State. He's an experienced teacher and master teacher for the Project Leader Way, and also he leads this special education program, engineering education program in the Saratoga Springs. We will talk about that a little bit. So about 10 years ago, Mike led this inventive team of the Saratoga High School, and specifically they invented a device called the Garden Consultant. So Mike, can you talk a little bit about your invention?
So there was a group of Cornell professors that developed a manual testing procedure, and that testing procedure had about 16 steps in it and was rather labor intensive and required the person doing the test to be pretty well equipped with skills. And my students had the idea that we could make this test much easier by the use of some data acquisition devices. And they were able to do that with the help of some funding from the Lemelson Foundation. And they also able to develop a web app.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you very much, Michael, for the introduction. And that was such an exciting invention. I wish I can have the garden consultant so that my plants in my backyard wouldn't die. Yeah. Okay, so as I mentioned, just for today, we will talk about project-based learning. First, I would like to elaborate on how we envision the relationship between project-based learning and invention. Specifically, as a lot of you might know, our group focuses on technical inventions. So we define 3 characteristics of invention. That is useful, unique, and reduced to practice. So an invention needs to be useful with a client, a beneficiary, a consumer, or user. It needs to be unique. That means it needs to be something that was not previously known. And also invention also needs to be more than just ideas. They need to be reduced to practice so that they can be made into prototypes so that we can prove the concept. So we view that invention and project-based learning overlap a lot, particularly those involve iterative designs and the making of certain products and offer potentials for innovation. Some project-based learning projects present use with design challenges, but often the design challenges may not necessarily be completed within the context of the consumers or the beneficiaries. So for us, the invention, one key element of the invention is to consider the needs of the users or the beneficiaries. So that's how we envision this the difference between project-based learning and invention. But at the same time, we recognize that the making of the design parts is one aspect of the reducing idea to practice. So that's where certain kinds of design work is necessary in order to reduce the idea into a working prototype. So specifically, when students start with invention projects, often it's very challenging if you ask a student go ahead to think about what they can invent, because students typically, they don't know what they are capable of, and they often would give you invention ideas that are not feasible. So in order to help them, teachers need to prepare students with fundamental hands-on skills and minds-on knowledge through project-based learning specifically. Then students can apply what they learned to their future invention projects. So next, I would like to invite Don and Scott to talk about the implementation of successful project-based learning experiences among students. Don and Scott, can you talk about how you designed and implemented project-based learning at your organization?
Sure. Our career techs, all our courses have projects embedded within them as a hands-on learning by doing, and it has since the 70s. That's one of the things that really has set our career tech system apart and made it kind of world famous, is that we have that project-based learning component really well embedded in our curriculum even. One of the problems, though, is that we've had that approach for a long time, but we haven't really innovated it since, I think, back in the 70s. So let me just give you a good example of this. A good example is our practical nursing program. We do train the nurses in theory and complex anatomy and physiology, but we also make sure that they can perform necessary skills. And I'm for one, I'm very glad about that, because I want to be sure when the nurse is taking my blood that she's actually performed that skill with 100% accuracy in nursing school, before she's out working in the real world, not just read about it or watch video, So that's kind of a good example of what we mean when we say, practical application and project-based approaches. But what we have is we have a framework now that we've developed in the last few years for our campuses here in Canadian Valley. And that framework focuses on the student, allowing them to choose projects related to their passions, whatever that they want to do. And we incorporate that iterative design process within those projects. For example, students in our graphic design program, they might be designing 2D objects in their software that they're learning, but then they can bring them in here and they can make 3D prints of those 2D objects that they produce in class. So as we developed the framework, we consulted on most of the sources and the experts in project-based learning. That all the people that are in that field, we kind of read what they had to say, and Scott and I both have had training experience with project-based learning places like Buck Institute for Education. So we had that background. But really what happened is Scott and I, we had a conversation, we had a discussion about what did we really want to do with teaching and learning. And we figured that most people, what we saw anyway from our vantage point was throughout our careers, we both have lengthy careers in common education as well, we saw a lot of lip service to project-based learning where people say they believe it on one hand, but then the practices that they put into practice in the classroom don't really match up with that belief. So we wanted to see a situation where students select a project, they want it by their own decisions, and that's the 3 phases that we're talking about here. So a student will launch their own project, they'll research and design their own project. They implement the project with the guidance from a coach. That coach can be me or Scott or an instructor in the classroom, guides by the sides. The coach who implements that project with that student, they observe and they document. That's the job of the coach in that phase. Coaches have to behave as coaches and resist the urge to do the project for the student. And that sounds kind of weird, but that is really truly the hardest part, is to jump in and do it for the student. And I see it happen over and over again. Coaches have to use Socratic questioning as a tool to engage the learner in deeper and deeper thinking. That is hard work to do that. At the end, the student and the coach both reflect on the project, but the main role of the coach is to observe and collect evidence of learning. Scott, you have something to add?
I think what I would add is those initial conversations with students, they're difficult. What we noticed is that students had experienced so much traditional instruction that when we started talking to them about creatively approaching a problem with some sort of innovative solution, they kind of lock up and hadn't really experienced what it meant to think out of the box and to come up with their own solutions. And so when we discovered this, we really knew that we were on the right track in opening up project-based learning with our students. And as we began, we observed that the students, they saw failure as a stopping point or an end point. And what we really impressed upon them is the whole iterative process, and let them understand that the failure or an unexpected outcome is really just a launching point for a new iteration and a new starting point in the design process. So it really didn't take long when students understood that we took them where they were and challenged them to be creative and innovative. And really, like Don mentioned with the coaching piece, we don't do much other than try to ask the right questions to the students and provide that positive environment where they can fail and innovate. And since we've done that, it's been quite the great experience. And it doesn't take long on our campuses for word to get around. And, you know, when we first launched, didn't have a whole lot of traffic, but now there's just a steady flow of students paying lip service to what we do, and projects in and out every day.
So down, yeah.
Yeah, this is an example of a student project. This is a couple of students from our early care education program. These are the young people who are learning to work with early childhood students. Like I said, we have a working daycare here. And so these two students were tasked with finding a replacement for a bookshelf and memorial that were going to sit in the entry of the daycare. And there were, this is a curricular project that was within the early care program. It had to do with facility planning. It had to do with planning educational activities and things like that are part of their curriculum. These students, first, the first bookshelf they found was too expensive, and it was also in such a way that our purchasing of it was not possible because of restrictions that we had, and just also expense. And so these two students decided that they could design the same kind of a bookshelf, and we had the resources here at our school in our construction trades program to actually construct that bookshelf. And it's constructed in such a way that it meets some needs that they had identified educationally within the program for what they were trying to do. They collaborated with not only the construction trades class, but they also collaborated with our auto collision repair technology class. And the construction trades class actually built the bookshelf, and the auto collision repair technology class actually painted the bookshelf. And all under the supervision of those two students who learned a lot about collaborating with other people. There were a lot of interpersonal social skills that they had to develop in order to carry out this project. So that kind of leads to an idea that there are things beyond just the curricular goals that you're addressing that the students learn as they go through project-based learning. It really is quite a rich experience, much richer than the normal traditional classroom experience. As a reflection, those students wrote so the third phase of project-based learning in our framework is the project reflection. The students were so impressed with what they had learned, they decided to write their project reflection as a children's book that actually sits on the bookshelf in the entryway. So that's how rich of an experience I think it was for these students to engage in this particular project from beginning to end, and it did really show all three phases of the framework, and I think it's a good example. Scott, I think you have one too.
Oh, the operation game, really life-sized operation game, really started out as a conversation among our surgical technology faculty. They were thinking of some way to help promote their program in a fun and engaging way. And the conversation extended to students, and at the time that this was built was the time when a number of these were getting built. But between the faculty and the students, they came up with, okay, we want to do this. But then when it comes down to the expertise of making it happen, that first phase really involved a conversation with our service careers program. They have all sorts of construction materials and equipment, and so we brought in that instructor and his students. And as that phase was getting off the ground, we also needed some kind of graphic to go on top. So that collaboration reached out to our graphics design program, and those students, they got together and they came up with the graphic for the board. And then when it came time to actually start wiring up the components, our HVAC program, who have a lot of experience with electronics and microcontrollers, they jumped in there, and their students did all of the wiring, the internal wiring, and then the final assembly was done here in the makerspace. So that's just an example of how we have multi-programs here on campus, well, at all of our tech centers, how the students reach out across programs to come to a final prototype. And the operation game is an example of that. And it started out as it was going to be a stationary board, but as the ideas and iterations came along, it has foldable legs and it has wheels, so that thing folds up and can be carried out and move around for marketing purposes.
Wow, these are really good examples of how students engage in project-based learning projects. Especially, I love the part students actively seek for collaborations with other students in order to accomplish the project. Thanks a lot for sharing them, John and Scott. So again, it's very challenging to ask a student to start with the invention project. So teachers need to prepare students with hands-on skills and minds-on knowledge so that we can support students to develop inventive mindset among students. So specifically to prepare students with the necessary design skills and knowledge, Mike, I know you lead a unique program in your community where you prepare young students as well as high school students with design experiences. Mike, can you talk about your program? Yeah.
With our coursework in our engineering program, we have always some instructional component, and then once the students have understood the concept that we're looking to get a hold of, then they're posed with a problem where they have to use the skills that they just picked up. The students then design some type of a solution, and then they're going to iterate that, and then they're going to present that solution out to the rest of the class. And at the high school level, these projects can sometimes last up to a quarter, 10 weeks or possibly even more. And we had the idea that we could do this for elementary students as well. And with the elementary students, we run workshops, and they're run by my high school engineering students. And they're all day Saturdays, and we typically have 150 elementary students, and we have 5 stations. Each one of those stations has some type of an engineering concept, and my students give a short presentation, and then the students have to, again, use those types of skills to solve some type of problem that we're given. And the students iterate on their design, and then they do a final little presentation. So that's the final presentation. For some of them can just be, hey, everybody get together and we'll get a picture of your final. The students usually have. At this point, as of today, we've done serviced over 10,000 elementary students, and this Helen asked me for a picture of my students at work, and on that next slide, you'll see this is a picture from yesterday.
It's educating young engineers program. So what happened with the program is that the high school students actually help facilitate this engineering program on Saturdays and in after-school settings, basically help young students like elementary school students or even kindergarten students to start with engineering or project-based learning experiences. Here you can see these are pictures of kids creating Lego cars or creating brush boards, basically by using all kind of materials they can find, and then all these projects are facilitated by high school students or volunteers from the community. And then what happened is with this Saturday program or after school program, this generates funds so that high school students can use them for their project leader-way projects or the invention project they engage with. Here on the left side of the picture, you can see these are high school students. Actually, they're leaders of the I program. They're working with the local teachers or the local PTO committee members so that they can plan for a Saturday session with local elementary schools. On the right side is the example where they are using the funds from this I program so that they can work on project leader-way projects. We're going to have resources about the program on the final page, so we can, if you are interested, you can click on those links. Okay. So now I just want to summarize a little bit. So the project-based learning helps to provide necessary design skills and knowledge to prepare students for more open-ended invention projects. Specifically to implement project-based learning, this would require a shift of teachers' roles from being a teacher to a facilitator. So educators can coach the learning experience, but actually it's the learner who has the experience and it's the learner who possesses the learning. However, educators can facilitate the learning by you can question students, as Scott and Don mentioned. You can question students for deeper thinking about the experience. You can do observations or recording the evidence of student learning. You can encourage students to participate in iterative design and also guide students through extensive reflections about their learning experience, the lessons or the failures they learn, and how they can improve the future. Okay. So next, these are briefly the resources we have. Here these are all the resources listed on the Lemelson-MIT website, including the JV Invent Team, the Invent Team Grant Initiatives, and also we have a special page on Inventor Archives. And here these are resources about the I program of the Saratoga Springs High School, and also we have all the information about the Canadian Valley Tech Center. So here you can find their project-based learning framework and also some videos. You can also follow them on Twitter and Instagram. Okay.